I woke up bald on my son's wedding day. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a dream, a cruel little ripple before joy returned. The room smelled faintly of perfume and antiseptic, sweet and sharp together like a lie. I lifted my hand to push hair from my face and touched skin, not stubble, not softness, bare, burning skin. A sting ran across my scalp, as if the night had left a map of fire there. A small ivory card lay pinned to my pillow with neat blue letters. Congratulations. At last a haircut that matches your age. A crooked heart trailed at the end, a flourish that pretended to be cute. I could smell the sender in the paper itself, that expensive citrus note she always wore to Sunday brunches, as if scent alone could buy nobility. Hello, dear friends. Please write in the comments which city or country you're from. It's always so interesting to see where our listeners are watching from. Enjoy the story. I did not scream. I sat very still and listened to my breath rise and fall, a metronome calling me back from the edge. Across the room, the safe waited in its dark square, the door still closed, the combination still my silent secret. Inside, an envelope with signatures and instructions, the wedding gift I had spent weeks preparing, a transfer of $22 million to my son and his bride, a last attempt to lay a bridge over a widening river. I stood, opened the safe, and took the envelope in both hands. The paper felt wrong today, rough, almost cutting, like holding a blade by the edge. I slid it back, turned the dial one click at a time, and listened to the lock fall into place. A clear, dry sound. Decision made. I called our attorney. He answered on the second ring, voice brisk and warm, the way it is when a man earns his living by sounding unshakable. Avery, I said, put everything on hold. Not a single dollar moves. Tonight, after the reception, you come to my house. We rewrite the will. A pause. Is something the matter, Beatrice? Only one thing, I said. I finally woke up. The mirror over the vanity gave me a stranger. No glorious silver mane, no carefully trained waves, nothing to soften the bones. I saw a naked crown and eyes that had known too much paperwork and too many silences. The woman in the glass was not a victim, though. She looked like a cliff after the storm strips the soil away. What remains is not pretty, but try to move it. I opened the closet and slid the navy silk from its hanger. I bought that dress as a gift to myself after closing a 30-story tower in downtown Boston, a victory I carried in the lining like a private prayer. Today, it would be armor. The city's cold light moved across the marble floor as the first snow began to fall, tiny white signatures drifting down, blessing nothing, covering everything. The doorbell rang. Lucia. She had done my hair for more than 20 years. When I let her in, she took one look at my head and covered her mouth with both hands. Oh, my dear God. I shook my head. No questions. Help me stand tall. She unpacked a long black box. Silk rustled, comb, pins, a wig the colour of moonlight. It took patient hands and half a can of hope to seat it right. When she clipped the last piece, she lifted a mirror behind me and let me decide who I was. The woman looking back had the calm surface that made men in boardrooms choose their sentences carefully, not the softness of youth, the precision of winter. I paid Lucia and added a thick envelope she didn't try to refuse. She touched my shoulder on the way out. You are strong, Beatrice. I nodded. A truth does not need words to stand. I poured coffee I did not drink and watched the yard. Snow powdered the red brick path I had walked 1,000 times, from the years when I was 32 and newly widowed, when I carried a small boy on my hip and a larger fear in my chest, to the years when that boy became a man who never waited for a bill to arrive before ordering the wine. I thought of nights in an old armchair, reading contracts until the text became a river. I thought of the first duplex signed with a trembling hand, of rents collected, roofs replaced, the long ledger of a life built brick by brick so my son would never know the hunger that raised me. I set the cup down. My hand was steady. I tucked a small voice recorder into my purse. Not because I intended drama, because I trusted proof more than promises now. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. The ceremony would begin in the afternoon at the old stone church, with the tall windows and the narrow pews that can make joy feel formal. There were still long hours to move through, and yet it seemed the day had already chosen its road. I dressed. Navy silk, pearl earrings, a grey wool coat, the cashmere scarf my son gave me long ago when gifts were still about love and not obligation. The wig lay soft and cool around my cheekbones. I learned its weight quickly. A woman can carry anything once she decides it belongs to her, even grief. The driver pulled up and glanced in the rear view with a worry he tried to hide. I lifted 2 fingers. "Silence today," I said. Snow ticked against the glass as the city slid past. Couples gripping mittened hands, a man hauling a Christmas tree on a cart, a child in a red hat with a mouth full of winter. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by someone they would have bled for. It is an old story, older than vows, older than rings. In that private drift between neighborhoods, I made myself a plain promise. I would no longer purchase closeness with money. I would not confuse motherhood with surrender. And if the truth needed a voice, I would give it mine. We slowed near the church, and I felt peace rise over the anger like snow over stone. Not a forgiving peace, a clear one. The kind that comes when a person stops lying to herself. I stepped out into the brittle light and lifted my chin to the cold. The wind nipped at my lips and tried to find the seam of the wig, but it held. I smiled at the challenge. Inside, staff hurried with flowers and candles and lists, the choreography of celebration, lace against wood, roses against winter, careful hands making beauty credible. I took a seat near the front and let the hush of the place fold around me. The stained glass caught the weak sun and poured it into the room in bands of berry and blue. I wondered if faith is really colour trapped in stone, shining most when the outside is bleak. Memory walked in and sat beside me. 32 with a death certificate in my purse, and a boy with wet lashes asking where his father was. Years of door-knocking, nights with cold coffee, mornings when I pretended I was not tired so that he could pretend the world was safe. Later, a new car for him, because I believed the absence of a father could be padded with leather. Tuition paid before the bill arrived, because I believed confidence could be poured like water into a glass. Then Sabrina, with her perfume and her bright stories, and the way she measured every room for what it could give her. Between those rooms and this pew ran a thread I refused to snip. I loved my son. That is both fact and trap. I had fallen into the trap for too many years. Today, I would step out. My phone buzzed. Messages. Congratulations. Where to meet. A cousin who adored celebrations. A distant aunt who adored gossip. I slid the phone back into my purse and let my fingertips brush the little recorder beside it. A pulse of certainty went through me so clean and sharp it might have been fear's twin. The device was only plastic and wire, but it felt like a key. Perhaps the key was not the thing itself, but the woman who had placed it there without trembling. A bridesmaid rushed down the aisle with a bouquet the size of a small country. Someone laughed in the vestibule. The organist tried a march and let it fall away, embarrassed by the echo of his own grandeur. The day arranged itself around me like a set designed by God, velvet ropes and golden light and shared breath. I folded my hands and studied the tiny tremor in my little finger until it quieted. By the time the first guests began to filter in with their bright chatter and silk wraps, my face was ready. There is a mask a proud mother wears on her son's wedding day. I knew how to fasten it. I thought of the note on my pillow again, the way the blue letters curved with a schoolgirl neatness, as if cruelty could be clean when written carefully. I pictured the crooked heart and found, to my surprise, that I felt neither rage nor shame. I felt a calm that had weight to it. An anchor finally dropped. The usher rehearsed where to seat distant relatives. White roses leaned toward the aisle. Candlelight trembled in its glass. I let my gaze travel up the tall stone ribs of the ceiling and whispered into the quiet of my own chest. You will not break, Beatrice. Not today. Not again. Outside, the snow was thickening. I imagined the city softening under it. The voices, the angles, the haste. Somewhere, the woman who had cut my hair slept on a bed of future plans, warm with what she believed she had already won. Somewhere, my son tied his tie and told himself that a life can be built on debts called love. And here, in a wooden pew, I pressed my palm to my purse and felt the steady shape of the truth I carried. This is how partings begin, not with a shout. With a stillness so complete, it becomes a choice. I closed my eyes for a breath and opened them to the coloured wash of the glass across my knuckles. Green like winter sea, red like a good wine, gold like a coin you decide not to spend. The organist tried the march again, softer now, almost a confession. Someone hushed someone else. Doors sighed open and shut. The world held its breath in that particular way it does before a ceremony, as if it too is deciding whether to bless what is about to happen. The decision for me had been made at the bedside, when my fingers touched fire and the note told me who I was supposed to be. The girl they wanted to humiliate was gone. The woman that remained had work to do. I sat a little taller. The wig settled like a crown I had earned the hard way. When my son looked down the aisle later, he would see a mother who had brought him to this day with her bare hands and her sleepless eyes. Whether he would see anything beyond that was no longer my responsibility. A soft draught moved through the nave, raising the hair at the nape of my neck where the wig met skin. I took it as a blessing from the side door someone had left ajar, a little cold to keep me awake. Good. Let the cold come. I had walked through worse. The candles steadied. The murmur deepened. Winter drew close to the stone. I folded my hands once more, and in that modest posture there was a blade. I did not intend to use it out of anger. I intended to carve a clean line between a past I had outgrown and a future I would claim. And if the truth hurt, so be it. Pain can be a teacher if you refuse to let it be a jailer. The procession would begin soon. There would be music and smiles and the whole theatre of it. But before all that, in the quiet that still belonged to me, I bent my head and made one last promise. I will stand. I will not hide. I will not spend another dollar to buy a love that does not exist. Then I lifted my face to the stained glass, to the colours, to the waiting, to the snow, and let the morning settle into its new shape. The first notes of the organ rehearsal spilled through the cold air. I sat motionless, the kind of stillness you learn after too many negotiations and too many funerals. From the far side of the church came the smell of lilies and candle wax, rich enough to make you dizzy. I told myself to breathe. Breathe like a woman who had already survived worse. A bridesmaid brushed past, her perfume slicing the air like a blade. The door to the side corridor drifted open. I meant to step outside for air, but something, a rustle, a whisper, held me. Then I heard his voice. Michael. My son's tone carried that careful calm he used when he was hiding something. Tessa, not now. Don't come here. I told you to wait until after the ceremony. Tessa. The name punched through me. His secretary. The girl with the quick smile and the coffee always ready. I pressed my back against the marble column, heart hammering. Even the echo of my breath sounded like betrayal. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper, low but sharp. After I get that money from my mother, everything changes. We won't have to sneak around anymore. Just a few more hours. The words didn't hit. They sliced. I felt them open me, one by one. That money was my 22 million, my lifetime, converted into digits. I wanted to step out, to shout his name. But instinct, the same that had kept me alive in boardrooms, said wait, listen. Proof speaks louder than anger. Michael again. She'll sign the transfer after the ceremony. She always does what I ask. You know how she is. She just wants to please me. The sound of his laugh, soft, confident, turned my blood to ice. My hand slid into my purse. The small recorder blinked red. He was still speaking. Once that's done, we'll be free. No more pretending. Then footsteps approached, and his tone shifted, lighter, performative. All right. See you after. Love you. The line clicked. The silence afterward was so thick I could hear the wax dripping from the candles. I stepped out slowly, forcing my breath into rhythm. In my purse, the device glowed like a heart. The boy who used to grip my hand crossing the street now whispered to another woman about escaping me. Not me. Not even Sabrina. Me. The one who gave him everything. I returned to the pew and sat down, spine straight. Around me, the church hummed with quiet life. Ushers, florists, guests adjusting scarves. I looked like any other mother waiting proudly for her son. Inside, I was studying a battlefield. I kept seeing the 12-year-old face that once hid in my arms at his father's funeral. The same child who used to ask, "Will you always be here, Mom?" And I had promised. Always. Promises made in grief are heavy chains. The recorder's weight against my thigh steadied me. I had the first truth. And truth, once caught, never lets you go. But something still burned. Sabrina. The note, the perfume, the smugness. Her cruelty had a designer label. My gut told me her hands weren't clean either. I rose quietly and moved toward the bridal suite at the far end of the corridor. Each step echoed softly over the marble. Light leaked through the half-open door. White, bright, full of the illusion of happiness. Laughter spilled out, brittle and too high. Then her voice. Sabrina's. I'll have the entire fortune by evening, half of 22 million by law. Michael's too naive to see it. The other women gasped, then giggled, that cruel kind of laughter that feeds on confidence. She went on, lower, colder. After that, I'll divorce him. Already spoke to my lawyer. I don't need him, just the money. And the old woman? We'll find her a luxury nursing home. Somewhere quiet. Out of sight. Out of mind. My hand gripped the frame. I could feel the pulse hammering through my palm. I wanted to walk in and slap the silk right off her dress. But I didn't, because I understood something in that second. This was no longer personal. It was a reckoning. The recorder blinked again, red and patient, catching every poisoned word. I stepped back into the corridor before they could see my shadow. My legs trembled, but my steps stayed steady. Back in the sanctuary, the choir rehearsed again. a calm sound washing over my fury. I sat down, folding my hands, letting my heartbeat slow. If anyone had looked at me, they would have seen a serene woman praying before her son's vows. Only I knew I was sharpening a blade of truth. When I opened my eyes, the stained glass poured colour across my lap. Ruby, emerald, gold. It felt like a sign. Maybe God was showing me the way. Not revenge, revelation. And I promised myself, when the time comes, I will not tremble. I will not whisper. I will let the truth speak for me. The organist settled on a gentle prelude, a ribbon of sound curling through stone. I sat very still and let the hush of the nave cool my temper, the way snow hushes a city. Somewhere behind me, a child's shoe scraped marble, and a mother whispered, "Shh," and even that small tenderness felt like a message. Keep your voice, keep your measure, keep your aim. A verger in a black coat moved down the aisle, checking candles with the concentration of a surgeon. White roses nodded along the pews, as if they too awaited the performance. I folded my hands and watched the door at the back of the church, the wood dark with age, the brass bright from generations of touch. In that doorway, I had once imagined a different girl for my son, not a saint, just a kind heart, just a steady gaze that told the truth without drama. Life rarely gives you your imagined version. It gives you a curriculum. The choir shifted from idle hum to something like a hymn. Guests arrived in soft clusters, breath misting from their lips as the doors opened and closed, winter riding in on their coats. I nodded at familiar faces and gave small smiles to strangers. The mask never cracked. I could have been any proud mother whose heart beat a little faster for joy. Inside, I was counting windows, counting breaths, counting the steps between the pew and the head table where the microphone would stand later under the chandelier. Not revenge, I reminded myself. Revelation. Let light do what light does when you lift the shade. I felt the recorder in my purse the way a soldier must feel a pocket watch before battle, not as a weapon, but as a boundary with time. Evidence is merciless in the best way. It does not care about explanations or second chances or tears in a lobby. It cares about what was said, and when, and by whom. I have signed too many contracts not to respect a record. The doors at the back of the church opened wider. Ushers straightened. The chatter softened. The processional began like a page turned. First the tiny attendants with flower baskets, so careful in their work that my throat ached. Innocence always makes a sharper contrast when you have seen rot. Bridesmaids in creams and blushes came next, faces arranged in practiced joy, each step a lesson in grace that would dissolve in a single minute of truth. I found no pleasure in that thought. I found only clarity. Then the groom stepped into view, and the congregation leaned forward with the same tilt, the way a field of grass leans toward a wind. Michael looked as he always looks when he has rehearsed a role. Handsome, polished, practiced, a touch of theatre at the corners of his smile. He scanned the room, eyes bright with the kind of light that loves an audience. When his gaze reached me, it softened by a hair. He dipped his chin in that small son's nod that once meant everything. My body remembered responding with warmth. My mind did not move. The priest's voice rose, warm and ceremonial. We stood, and then sat, and then stood again, the choreography of reverence carried out by people who mostly come for the spectacle, but are still willing to bow at the right moments. In the pause before the bride, the organ melted into a slow march, and the doors were drawn wide as if the church itself took a breath. Sabrina appeared in lace and light, a sweep of white that made cameras blink and aunts murmur. She knew how to fill a frame. Her chin was high, her smile calibrated, her hand delicate on her father's arm. I felt the old habit push against my chest, that trained impulse to approve what appears beautiful. A different habit answered. Beauty without mercy is only performance. The truth would not scuff her dress. It would simply sit beside her like an uninvited guest and let the room decide. As Sabrina passed, a drift of her perfume brushed my face, the same note I had smelled in the letter beside my head that morning. The memory flashed not as a wound, but as a seal. She glided to Michael. They turned toward the altar, two perfect figures at the front of a carefully painted world. I looked at their backs and felt the quiet gather in me like water behind a dam. The readings began. A cousin with a gentle voice spoke about love's patience. A friend spoke about the cord of 3 strands that cannot be broken. The words rang sweet in the air and landed bitter on my tongue. Patience does not mean silence in the face of violence done without hands. A cord braided with greed snaps no matter how pretty the bow. I kept my face composed and listened as if I believed, because I do believe in vows. I have just learned to respect them enough to make sure they are not being counterfeited. When it was time for the exchange, Michael took Sabrina's hands. He spoke slowly, as if savoring each vow. He promised to cherish, to keep, to cleave, to shield, to share. His voice never shook. If someone had told me years ago that a man can speak truth-shaped sentences with a liar's intention and make a room weep, I would have argued. I would have insisted that the body betrays the lie. Today, I knew better. Practice enough, and a mask becomes a second skin. Sabrina's turn. Her eyes shone like wet glass. She promised devotion, partnership, endurance, home. Her mouth shaped the words beautifully, as if the vowels themselves were pearls on her tongue. I did not need to remind myself of the bridal room. The recorder did not need to remind me either. The tone of her earlier voice still hummed in my bones. The divorce attorney already contacted. The share of the fortune already measured. The old woman already labelled as a future patient in a luxury cage. To hear pretty vows laid over that steel was to watch frost bloom over a poisoned well. The priest asked the old question that has stopped more than one ceremony. Does anyone know a reason these two should not be joined? The words seemed to echo longer than they needed to, as if the building itself had learned to hold silence like a tray and offer it to whoever might have the courage to take a cup. A few heads turned, the reflex of story-taught hearts that love a scene. I did not stand. Not yet. Theatre rewards interruption. Truth prefers timing. Rings slid onto fingers, hands clasped, blessings were spoken. The priest's face wore that tired kindness men of faith learn when they have shepherded too many parties to call the flock by name. He declared what everyone came to hear, and the room burst into applause like water boiling over. I clapped as well, measured and steady, the sound of a woman honouring the form even as she prepared to burn the forgery from the page. They walked back down the aisle, radiant, and applauded. Sabrina's dress flowed like a bright river. Michael's smile widened with each congratulation thrown like rice. I fell in behind the first cluster of guests, close enough to watch the seams in the illusion, far enough to let their happiness cushion the floor for what would come. Outside, the snow had softened to a civilized flurry, the sky the pale grey of old silk. Drivers idled. Photographers called instructions as if posing could make a life hold. The reception hall glittered as if a jeweller had designed it. Golden light, mirrored panels, white linen, crystal that threw little constellations against the ceiling. Music breathed in the background, a pulse you felt before you noticed it. Waiters moved like chess pieces, clean lines, disciplined routes. I walked through it all with a composure I wished I had learned earlier in life, the composure of a woman who knows she has everything she needs and nothing to prove. At my place at the head table, a glass of champagne waited, catching the chandelier's light so perfectly it seemed conscious. I sat, set my purse within easy reach, and touched the recorder once as a blessing. In that gesture there was no spite, only respect for the labour of truth. I thought of the women I have known, widows who clawed their way back to sanity, mothers who buried their own hunger to feed a child, daughters who nursed fathers who forgot their names. We are taught to carry without complaint and to forgive before the wound is cleaned. When we finally say enough, the world calls us cruel. The world can call me whatever it likes. Names are wind. Reality is stone. Guests drifted to our table with warmth and questions and stories of the old days. I smiled. I answered. I let their kind sincerity rest on the surface like petals on a dark lake. The master of ceremonies tested his microphone and made jokes about families becoming one ship at last. I caught Michael's profile. How handsome he is. How easily he sells the future to a room that wants to be convinced. I watched Sabrina's hands flutter as she spoke to a distant aunt, her perfect nails like little flags of triumph. No, not triumph. Premature celebration. The band shifted songs. The room gathered itself without being told, that natural tide a party learns when it has run on schedule. The master of ceremonies lifted his arm, and the hum fell to a shimmer. His voice rang above the music, bright and practiced. He welcomed friends and kin. He praised the happy couple. He thanked the planners and the florist and the god who invented lace. And then he said the line I had measured my breathing for since morning. "And now," he said, hand extended toward me with a showman's flourish, "please welcome the groom's mother, Beatrice, to share a few words on this beautiful day." My chair whispered against the floor as I rose. The sound was small and final. I placed one hand around the stem of the champagne flute, not to drink, but to keep the other free. Faces lifted in a wave, eyes bright with curiosity and goodwill, phones already lifting like small moons to capture the moment. I felt strangely light, as if the floor had calmed the way a sea calms when the wind gives up. This is what resolve feels like when it finally lands. Not fire, not ice, but the exact weight of your own name. I thanked them for coming. I thanked the families for their kindness. I told the room that a mother's joy on a day like this is a sanctity no one should take lightly. I let the words come slow and even, the way you cut a ribbon. The audience leaned closer in the sweet way crowds lean when they sense a heart at a microphone. I set the flute down without spilling a drop, reached into my purse, and laid the small recorder on the linen, the red light asleep for now, like an ember beneath ash. I looked at my son, and then at the woman he had married. I could have spoken of the day he learned to read, the day he broke his arm, the day he made me laugh so hard I burnt a pot of soup. I could have spoken of Sabrina's perfume and poise, and the way she knows how to make any dress look as if it had been made for her spine alone. But this was not a time for charm or for nostalgia. This was a time to honor the very thing those readings had praised: love that does not lie. I lifted my eyes to the room and felt the hush turn from polite to expectant, that delicate shift you taste like salt on the air just before rain. My hand hovered over the button. For a heartbeat, I remembered the ivory card pinned to my pillow, the blue letters that tried to define me by age and humiliation. I remembered the marble column cold against my back as my son promised another woman a future bought with my labor. I remembered the bright bridal room, and the chill of a voice planning a comfortable prison for a mother who had given too much. I did not shake. "Before I finish my toast," I said, "I would like to share a few truths." The room did not breathe. I pressed the button. The microphone hummed, a soft electric breath before sound. Hundreds of faces glimmered under the chandelier, all warm, all waiting. My hand rested beside the small recorder, its red light no longer hidden. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "First," I began, "thank you, every one of you, for being here to celebrate this union. For a mother, watching her child step into a new life should be the greatest joy." Applause rippled, polite and light. I lifted my glass and let the noise fade. "For 33 years, I lived by a promise," I said. "After my husband died, I swore I'd protect my son from fear, from want, from anything that could wound him. I worked through nights and winters, built towers and bridges, because I believed love meant giving everything." Soft sighs, nods, the sentimental rhythm they expected. Good. Let them lean in. I drew one breath and changed my tone. Lower, colder, clear enough to cut glass. "And today, I came prepared to give a final gift. $22 million. The savings of a lifetime." Gasps spread like sparks through dry grass. Michael's smile twitched. Sabrina's eyes widened with hunger so bright it could light the room. I let the silence settle. The silence before a storm. "But there's something I learned too late," I said. "Not everyone deserves what you give." A rustle of confusion. Murmurs. Michael half rose, panic creeping into his face. "Mum." I lifted one hand. "No, sit." The hall obeyed the gesture before he did. I reached for the recorder, pressed play. My son's voice filled the golden room. "After I get that money from my mother, everything changes. We won't have to hide anymore." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came the collective intake of breath, the sound of disbelief snapping into horror. Michael's face drained white. He stammered, That's not, it's out of context." I pressed again. Another clip, cold and perfect. "She always wants to please me. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have it all. Freedom. No strings." Whispers rose like wind through dry leaves. Sabrina's fingers tightened on his sleeve. His arm shook her off. "It was a joke," he said hoarsely. "A joke." I met his eyes. "You were joking about betrayal? About your mother's money? About your vows?" His mouth opened, but no sound came. I turned to Sabrina. Her face was a mask of terror and denial. "And you," I said softly, "you have something to explain too." I pulled the small ivory card from my purse, the one pinned to my pillow that morning. "Congratulations," I read aloud. "You finally have a haircut that matches your age. Have a great day at my wedding." I held it up so the cameras could see. "That was you, wasn't it?" Sabrina's painted lips trembled. "That's not mine. You're making this up." I tilted my head, voice calm. "Then why did you brag in the bridal room that you'd divorce my son after collecting half of the fortune? And that you'd send me to a nursing home to keep me quiet?" The words hit like thunder. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered. Half the guests gasped, the rest lifted their phones. Sabrina tried to speak, but her throat refused. Her parents stood frozen near the door, faces grey with shame. I raised my glass once more. My hand didn't shake. "So," I said quietly, "I'm cancelling the gift. $22 million will stay where it belongs, with me. The money I bled for will build something better than greed." The silence cracked into noise, shocked whispers, chairs scraping, the flash of cameras, a dozen small storms colliding at once. Michael dropped back into his seat, hand over his face. Sabrina's eyes darted everywhere, searching for a way out, finding none. "The greatest gift I can give today," I said, "is the truth. And the truth is simple. Greed and betrayal never win." I set the glass down, turned, and began to walk. Behind me, voices tangled, outrage, sympathy, disbelief. Someone called my name. Someone else muttered good for her. I kept walking, every step measured. For the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders was gone. At the lobby doors, I heard hurried footsteps. "Mum, please." Michael's voice cracked. "Don't do this. You misunderstood." I turned slowly. The groom stood pale and shaking, the polished mask gone. "I've heard enough," I said. "You sold your integrity for comfort. You sold your mother for convenience." He grabbed my arm. I pulled free. "Don't call betrayal love, Michael. Don't call cowardice a misunderstanding." He fell silent, eyes glistening. And then he broke, dropped to his knees in his perfect tuxedo, whispering, "I was wrong." I looked down, heart heavy but steady. So was I. I thought I could buy loyalty. Turns out I can only afford freedom. Sabrina burst from the hall, face streaked with mascara, screaming that I'd ruined her life. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined your own." A few guests stepped between us. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "She's finished." Another voice answered, "No, she's finally begun." I walked into the snow. The cold air kissed my scalp through the wig, sharp and honest. Behind me the music still played, the same cheerful melody, now hollow. I didn't look back. The wedding was over. The masquerade, too. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw a woman walking tall, pearls glinting against navy silk, head high in the winter light. A woman who had finally remembered who she was. And though the air bit my skin, I smiled. Because some fires, once lit, don't burn you. They burn everything that held you down. Dawn arrived on quiet feet, pale light slipping between the curtains as if it were afraid to touch the room. No music, no voices, no forced laughter hiding sharpened teeth. Just the soft click of the house settling and the far-off hush of the sea moving as it always has, indifferent to human theatre. I lay still for a breath and waited for the ache. It did not come as grief. It came as a clean emptiness, the way a room feels after you have finally carried the last heavy box to the curb. My scalp tingled under the wig cap, tender but alive. I reached up and touched it with gentleness I had not offered myself in years. Even the sting felt like a truth. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and poured it into the white china cup with the tiny rosebud at the rim. The scent rose warm and faithful, a small loyalty that did not need to be earned. On the table lay an old notebook filled with numbers, lists, plans that had once seemed holy. I opened to the first page and read a sentence I must have written in some midnight faith. "Everything I have is for my son." I looked at the words, breathed, and drew a clean line through them with a red pen. Not because love had died, but because I had mistaken sacrifice for wisdom. My phone vibrated across the table, a restless thing. Messages piled like snowdrifts. Michael. Unknown numbers. A relative who could not resist picking the carcass of a scandal. I silenced them all. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Today did not belong to explanations or bargaining. Today belonged to decisions. I called Avery just after 9, knowing he would pick up because good attorneys understand that lives change on Sundays too. His voice came through steady and surprised. "Good morning, Beatrice. I heard there was an incident." There was a revelation, I said. Come to the office. We will rewrite the will. We will review every trust, every transfer, every little pipeline that could pour my work into the wrong hands. He hesitated only a breath. I will be there in an hour. I dressed in a soft sweater and a simple skirt, no armor needed now. The wig sat lighter today, no longer a disguise, simply a covering the world required until my own crown returned. On the drive, the winter sun poured silver over the road. The city looked washed, as if the snow had scrubbed away yesterday's noise. Between lights, I let my mind wander across the years, not to punish myself, but to understand the path that had led me to a door I finally had the courage to open. Avery's office sat in a dignified brick building with tall windows and a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. He had the conference room ready, legal pads, a carafe of water, a neat stack of files labelled with my name in a careful hand. He watched my face as if measuring whether to offer sympathy. I saved him the trouble. No condolences, I said, sliding into the chair. No pity. We are here to work. He nodded once, grateful, and opened the first folder. The will, he said. Do you want to adjust allocations or begin from a blank page? Begin from a blank page, I answered. The words felt like morning air. Michael is no longer an heir. There will be no discretionary trust that imagines him a child. There will be no automatic transfer to a woman who sees my life's labour as a ladder to climb and kick away. I want a foundation instead, a clean structure with rails. We will endow grants for widows and single mothers who want to build honest businesses. Women who know what a dollar weighs. Avery's pen moved quickly, ink flowing like certainty. And the gift you had prepared for the wedding? Cancelled, I said. Not deferred, not paused. Cancelled. If generosity becomes a bribe to keep your place in your own family, it is not generosity. It is ransom. I will not pay ransoms anymore. He looked up, a glint of something like admiration soft in his eyes. Then we will shut every pipeline, he said. Every autopay, every transfer, every safety valve that leaks value where value is not respected. We will write with precision, and we will file it properly. For hours we worked, clause after clause, line after line. He read, I clarified. He warned, I insisted. Sometimes I paused with the pen in my hand and listened, not to him, but to the new quiet inside me. Pain stirred there, yes, but it did not rule. A steadier voice spoke now, the one that knows there is a cost to truth and decides to pay it without shaking. When the last page was signed, Avery leaned back and set his pen down as if it were a tool he respected. You have done a hard thing, he said, the kind of hard thing that makes a future possible. I have done a necessary thing, I answered. Hard is only the word we use for necessary when we do not want to do it. We shook hands. In the elevator, I watched our reflections recede into the brushed metal, my face above the neat wool collar, my eyes clear in a way I had not seen since I was a younger woman who believed that hunger could be conquered by work alone. The doors opened to lobby light, and I stepped out feeling something I had not felt in too many winters. Release. Back home, the house greeted me with its familiar quiet. Paintings on the walls, photographs in frames. I walked room to room and let my gaze rest on each picture long enough to understand what it was and what it was not. Love lives in moments, not in paper under glass. I took down a handful and wrapped them in tissue, not to erase history, but to make space for a life that would no longer be curated around a single hope. In the study, I opened the safe and gathered bank books, share certificates, documents that had become a kind of shrine. I sorted them into a new cabinet and labelled the folder with 3 plain words in my own hand. Freedom Fund. I stood a minute and read the phrase again, letting it settle not just on the paper, but in the room. Money is a tool. In the wrong arrangement, it becomes a leash. I had worn that leash and called it love. No more. The phone rattled again against wood. I let it. For a moment, I imagined Michael standing somewhere with his face wet and his hands shaking, saying words he should have said years ago. My heart did its old ache. Then I remembered the sound of his voice behind the stone column in the church, soft and confident, planning a clean escape with the fuel of my labor. Compassion is not the same as forgetting. I chose myself and put the phone in a drawer. Afternoon slipped toward evening. The sky turned a deeper grey and the sea thickened to pewter. I wrapped myself in a shawl and stepped onto the porch. The cold was honest. It told the truth without apology. I poured a small glass of red wine and let it warm my palm before it warmed my mouth. In the distance, gulls lifted and settled again, bits of white punctuation over the water's long sentence. I remembered how it felt to walk into rooms as a young widow and speak to men who preferred to negotiate with other men. I remembered what it took to be precise when they expected me to be grateful, what it cost to hold the line when they told me I should bend. Those years built more than buildings. They built a spine. Yesterday had tried to sand it down with humiliation. Today had polished it instead. A neighbor walking his dog lifted a hand. I lifted mine back. A small grace exchanged in the good cold. The wine found my blood. The air found my lungs. For the first time since the note on my pillow, the world did not feel like an enemy camp. It felt like a field after harvest. Stripped, brown, honest, waiting for whatever seeds I chose to put in the ground. Inside, near the back door, leaned a plain wooden easel I had bought long ago and never used, a promise I kept postponing in the name of duty. I looked at it the way you look at a road at the edge of your land that you have never had time to follow. Not yet, I told myself. Soon. Let the ink dry on the new documents. Let the quiet teach me a few more truths. Then we will see what colour can do with a wound. The messages kept coming into the evening, and then became fewer as fatigue conquered curiosity. Sometime after dusk, a new text from Michael arrived, longer than the others, full of the words any mother wants to hear until she has learned what forgiveness is and is not. I read the first line and closed the thread. Mercy lives in me. But mercy will not be hijacked again by a boy in a man's suit. I made a simple supper and ate it at the small table by the window. No television, no music. Just the ocean's breath and the whisper of the heater and the quiet turn of a page as I read the front section of a newspaper that had been waiting by the door. I finished my meal and washed the plate with the pleasure of doing one small thing completely. Night fell fully. The house held its calm. I drew a bath and let the hot water loosen the last stubborn knots from my shoulders. When I slid into bed, I left the curtains open. Moonlight laid a pale band across the floor, silvering the edge of the rug. I lay on my side and thought about hair. How many years I had given to its care. How neatly I had allowed it to define my vanity, my age, my presentation to the world. How swiftly someone had taken it to mock me. How sure I felt now that when it grew back, it would belong to a woman who did not hide behind it. Sleep came like a tide returning, deliberate, quiet, inevitable. Just before it pulled me under, I spoke out loud into the dark, because sometimes you have to hear your own voice to believe yourself. I am not a bank, I said. I am not a hostage. I am not a myth other people get to write. The room did not answer. It did not need to. The truth I had chosen would keep answering in the morning. and in the morning after that, and in all the mornings to come. The morning after the signatures, I drove north. No destination, only distance. The radio whispered old songs that meant nothing, the kind that keep you company precisely because they have no past attached. Frost veined the edges of the windshield, dissolving under the weak sun. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then to one that ran along the ocean. I stopped when the horizon widened into a sheet of steel-blue light, and the wind carried salt and possibility. I left the car by a dune and walked down toward the water. The sea was calm that day, breathing evenly, as if it too had spent years in turmoil and finally exhaled. I stood at the edge and let the spray touch my face. Beneath the wig, my scalp tingled with the chill, a small electric reminder that healing begins where you stopped protecting yourself. I thought about the first time I saw this ocean, decades ago, on a trip with Michael when he was still small enough to carry on my hip. He had thrown stones and screamed with joy every time the waves swallowed them. "The sea eats everything," he had said, and I'd laughed. Now I knew how right he was. The sea eats fear, memory, shame. It gives back silence. A gull circled low. Somewhere behind me, a boat horn sounded, low, distant, patient. I felt the pull to move again, not to run, but to arrive. Down the road, a sign pointed toward an artist retreat that I had passed 100 times and never entered, because there had always been something more urgent to do. Today, nothing was urgent. I followed the sign. The retreat was a scattering of white cottages and glass studios facing the water. A woman in a wool cap greeted me with a nod, the kind strangers give when they recognize another kind of pilgrim. "Day visit or long stay?" she asked. "Undecided," I said. "Maybe both?" She laughed softly. "That's the best kind." She showed me a small studio with paint-splattered floors and a window that opened directly onto the horizon. The air smelled of turpentine and brine. I ran my fingers across the easel standing by the wall and felt the grain of the wood. For a long minute, I said nothing. Then I heard my own voice answer the question she hadn't asked. "I used to build towers," I said. "Now I think I'd rather build mornings." The woman smiled and left me there with a set of brushes, a box of colours, and more silence than I knew what to do with. I stood by the window until the light shifted from silver to gold, then sat and began to sketch. Not buildings, not people, just the curve where sky met sea. My hand was clumsy at first, but it remembered something older than contracts. The motion itself became prayer. By dusk, a man appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea. He was in his 60s, tall, hair salt white and wind-tossed, a canvas smudge on his sleeve. "New arrival?" he asked. "Temporary," I said. He nodded toward the ocean. "That's what they all say. The sea changes the meaning of temporary." We talked a little about the cold, the light, the stubborn gulls that stole sandwiches. Nothing personal. Just two humans who understood that conversation can be both shelter and distance. When he left, I felt no curiosity to follow his story. That was new to me, being content to let someone exist without wanting to fix or own or understand them. Freedom tastes like that sometimes, leaving things unnamed. That night, I rented the cottage beside the studio. It had a small stove, a crooked table, and sheets that smelled of salt. I unpacked one bag, the sweater, the notebook, the same pearl earrings I had worn to the wedding. I held them for a moment in my palm, then set them on the table, tiny moons under the lamplight, symbols of an armor that had done its job. For dinner, I boiled pasta, added butter, and ate slowly, listening to the wind graze the roof. Each sound of the sea felt like a word I almost remembered. I wrote one sentence in my journal. I am learning to live without witnesses. Over the next days, I painted. The first attempts were awkward, shapes struggling to escape precision. But by the third morning, the brush stopped obeying reason and started following breath. I painted water that was never the same twice, light that refused to stay loyal. Every mistake dissolved when I looked back at the horizon. Perfection belonged to the world, not to me. The man from the hallway, Samuel, I learned his name, sometimes passed by and nodded, leaving little gifts, a pear, a pencil, a folded newspaper. He never asked what I was running from. Gratitude doesn't always require confession. Some afternoons we walked along the cliffs and talked about colour, about balance, about the discipline of starting over. People think rebirth is dramatic, he said once. Usually it's just practice. When he spoke, I felt something in my chest unclench. Not romance, not need, just recognition. Two lives that had burned differently but ended up in the same quiet ash, learning that warmth can come from something as small as shared silence. One evening, I removed the wig and left it on the dresser. The air brushed my bare scalp, cool and forgiving. In the mirror, I saw new hair pushing through, soft, silver, certain. I touched it and smiled. It wasn't vanity, it was proof. That night, I dreamed of the sea flooding the ballroom where the wedding had been. Not cruelly, not destroying, cleansing. Chairs floated like forgiveness. The chandeliers became bubbles of light drifting upward. I woke before dawn, heart calm. Outside, the first blush of morning painted the water in rose and gold, and the world felt newly laundered. I brewed tea and stepped onto the porch. Samuel was there, sketchbook under his arm. He waved, his smile easy. "Beautiful morning," he called. "It is," I said. "Going to stay?" "For a while," I answered, "until I remember what forever means." He laughed. "You'll fit right in." He walked on, and I stood alone, watching the tide crawl forward, erase footprints, write new ones. For the first time in years, I felt no need to control the horizon. It could do as it pleased. Behind me, on the table, my phone vibrated once more, the final ghost of my old world trying to find a way back. I let it ring until it stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of choice. The sun rose higher. The air tasted of salt and paint, and something that might have been peace. I lifted my hand to the light, felt the warmth on my skin, and whispered to no one in particular. Some storms shave your head. Others teach you how to let the wind through. Then I smiled, because at last the wind did not hurt. By the end of the first month at the coast, time had stopped meaning what it used to. I woke with the tide instead of the clock. The sky, not the calendar, decided when to rest. There were days I painted until midnight, and others when I only watched light crawl over the walls and called that enough. Silence became a rhythm, not loneliness, not punishment. Rhythm. Each morning began with a walk to the beach, the sand cold, the sea talking in long vowels. I would stand there with my shoes in my hand, toes digging into the wet earth, and think about the strange arithmetic of loss. How subtracting people who hurt you can feel like gaining air. How being alone can, for the first time, sound like peace instead of echo. One morning, I met a child, a girl of about 8, collecting shells with the seriousness of a scientist. She held each one to her ear, listening for something only she could hear. When she noticed me watching, she smiled without fear. "Do they really have the sea inside?" she asked. "They do," I said, "if you listen long enough." She nodded and offered me one. pink and ridged like the inside of a heart. "You can borrow this one," she said, "but you have to promise to give it back." I promised. Children understand ownership better than adults. They know that everything beautiful is borrowed. That shell sat on my nightstand for weeks. I would lift it to my ear before sleep, hearing not the ocean, but the steady pulse of my own blood. Proof that I was still here. Samuel and I began sharing coffee most mornings, not planned, just the way weather happens. Sometimes he brought his sketches. Sometimes I brought silence. He painted boats that were never quite finished, said he liked leaving something undone to remind himself he was still becoming. He asked once, "Do you ever miss your old life?" I thought about it carefully. Sometimes I miss being needed, but needing approval, no. That's a hunger that never ends. He nodded as if he already knew. Freedom is just learning where not to look for applause. We rarely touched, but our conversations filled the air like light between trees. Soft, sufficient. Once he showed me how to prime a new canvas, pressing the brush flat to spread the gesso in long, patient strokes. His hands were steady. Mine trembled less each time. He never asked about my son. I never asked about his past. Some names weigh too much to carry uphill. At night, when the tide crept close to the dunes, I would write in my notebook. Little truths, nothing grand. Today, I painted without anger. Today, I forgave the mirror. Today, I didn't check the phone. Sometimes the wind caught a page and tore it free, and I let it go. Let the sea read it. Let it take whatever story it wanted. As the weeks passed, the colour returned to everything. The sea deeper, the grass brighter, the gulls braver. My reflection changed too. Short silver hair now covered my scalp, soft as frost. In the mirror, I looked like a woman who had stopped surviving and started existing. Then, one afternoon, while cleaning the studio, I found the pearls I'd worn at the wedding. I held them up to the light. Once, they had been symbols of restraint, the armor of elegance. Now, under the sun's kindness, they looked almost alive. Not weapons, not masks, just small moons born from irritation. Pain turned to beauty, the ocean's oldest lesson. I strung them on a piece of fishing line and hung them by the window, letting the breeze turn them slowly. Each rotation threw a faint glimmer across the wall, a reminder that even what was once used to cage you can become decoration if you change the frame. That evening, Samuel and I sat on the dunes watching the horizon fade. He said, "You know, it's funny. The sea doesn't forgive, but it forgets fast. That's what makes it peaceful." I laughed softly. "Then I must be turning into the sea." He glanced at me, smiling. "No, you're what grows beside it. You bloom after winter." The word bloom stayed with me long after he left. I painted until night swallowed the last streak of orange, trying to capture what blooming looked like when it wasn't about youth, but about returning to yourself. The canvas ended up abstract. Waves merging into skin tones, silver hair blending into sunrise. It didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be true. Later, lying in bed, I thought about Michael again. Not with rage or grief, but with the weary compassion you feel toward a stranger who once shared your last name. I didn't know if he was sorry. I didn't need to. His lesson was already paid for. Mine, too. I opened the window wider. The scent of salt and pine entered, clean and whole. The pearls clicked softly as they turned in the wind. I whispered into the darkness, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve rest." The sea answered with its endless rhythm, not promising peace, but offering space. I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, forever did not sound like a sentence. It sounded like a horizon, and somewhere beyond it, the new day was already blooming. The first real spring storm came in March. Rain drummed on the studio roof with the confidence of someone knocking on a familiar door. The wind carried the salt of the sea across the dunes, and I painted with the windows open, letting the world inside. Water streaked the glass, merging sky and earth into one restless mirror. When the storm quieted, I walked outside barefoot, the sand cool and wet, the air electric with renewal. My short silver hair clung to my temples, and for a moment I laughed. Not the polite, practiced laugh of the woman I used to be, but something unshaped, loud, alive. That sound startled me. I hadn't heard it in years. Later, as I rinsed the brushes, Samuel appeared in the doorway with a thermos of tea. He leaned against the frame, watching the sky empty itself of rain. "Beautiful chaos," he said. "It is," I replied. "Storms remind you you're still here." He smiled. "Or that the world still notices you." We sat in silence, drinking tea that tasted faintly of mint and iron. I realized I didn't want to leave this place. The city's noise, the sharpness of polished glass and ambition, they belonged to another lifetime, another version of me who thought love and worth were things to be earned through exhaustion. Here, worth was measured in breaths and brushstrokes. That evening, I opened my old phone, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. Dozens of unread messages blinked like tiny ghosts. The most recent was from Michael. It said only, "I saw the news clip. You were right. I'm sorry, Mum." I read it twice. My heart didn't race. It simply folded around the words, soft but steady. I typed back, "I hope you find peace. That's all any of us ever needed." Then I placed the phone in the drawer and closed it. Forgiveness, I'd learned, doesn't require reopening the door. It's enough to stop guarding it. In the weeks that followed, life reshaped itself quietly. I sold one of my apartments in Boston and donated the proceeds to the foundation Avery helped me build, the Langford Fund for Women Who Begin Again. The name made him smile. "Poetic," he said, "and fitting." Letters began arriving from women I'd never met. A single mother in Detroit who wanted to open a bakery, a widow in Maine who planned to turn her late husband's tools into an art studio, a young architect from Chicago designing safe housing for women escaping violence. Each letter was a small resurrection. I pinned them to the wall above my work table. Sometimes, standing before that patchwork of new beginnings, I wondered if this was what motherhood was always meant to be. Not ownership, not sacrifice, but the quiet privilege of watching life continue in forms that don't belong to you. One morning, I noticed a streak of sunlight catching the pearls hanging by the window. They cast small circles of light across the wall, like blessings scattered by an unseen hand. The room smelled of rain and oil paint. My latest canvas stood on the easel. A woman walking into the sea, hair silver, dress dissolving into foam, face turned toward the light. I had started it weeks ago without realizing it was a portrait. I signed the corner, simply Beatrice. When Samuel stopped by later, he looked at the painting for a long time, and then at me. "She's free," he said. "Yes," I answered. "And she finally knows it." He nodded. "You should show it." "I already have," I said, to myself. We laughed softly, the kind of laughter that doesn't need to fill the room because the silence around it already feels safe. That night, I walked to the edge of the sea again. The tide was high, the moon full, the water glowing like liquid glass. I took off my shoes and stepped in. The cold bit my skin, but I didn't flinch. I waded until the waves touched my knees and tilted my head to the sky. The stars were scattered thick, reckless, with abundance. The wind ran its fingers through my hair, and I felt that old memory again. The morning I woke bald, the shame, the fury, the breaking. It all seemed impossibly far away, like another life lived by another woman. The sea murmured its endless hymn. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone, not even to the sea, just to the world for continuing, for letting me start again. When I returned to the cottage, I wrapped myself in a blanket and wrote one last line in my journal. Some endings are just late blooms waiting for sunlight. I left the window open so the night could hear it. The pearls swayed gently in the breeze, scattering light across the walls. Little moons dancing to the rhythm of the sea. And outside, beyond the dunes, the horizon stretched wide and new, as if the world itself was turning the page.